October 28th, 1943. The height of the Second World War. The Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The official story is that on this day, nothing of consequence happened. The official story is a lie of omission. According to a legend that has haunted naval history for 80 years, something did happen. Something impossible. At 17:15 hours, eyewitness accounts claim a switch was thrown. Generators aboard the USS Eldridge screamed to an unnatural pitch. The fog thickened, pulsating with an eerie light, clinging to the hull. And then, silence. It didn't just become invisible. It vanished. The core claim of the Philadelphia experiment is this. The United States Navy, in a desperate attempt to create a miracle weapon that could render ships invisible to radar, and perhaps to the eye itself, tore a hole in the fabric of reality. The legend states that, using a warped application of Albert Einstein's unified field theory, the experiment worked. But far too well. The ship allegedly reappeared hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, for mere minutes, before teleporting back to Philadelphia. But the return was a nightmare. The cost of this impossible journey was the sanity and the very lives of the men aboard. Sailors were found fused into the steel bulkheads of the ship, living men, conscious, trapped inside the metal. Others were driven instantly insane. Some were found burning, as if from the inside out, and some simply never rematerialized at all. This event has been officially and passionately denied by the U.S. Navy ever since. It has been dismissed as a hoax, a fantasy, a sailor's tall tale, but the story refuses to die. Was this the most terrifying and well-guarded secret of World War II? Or was it the most elaborate, bizarre, and tragic deception of the 20th century? This is the 0-point file on the Philadelphia experiment. To understand why such a reckless experiment would even be considered, we must go back to the darkest days of the war. The Atlantic Ocean was a graveyard. Hitler's U-boat wolf packs were strangling the Allied war effort. They were sinking supply ships faster than they could be built. The technology of the time, radar, sonar, was just barely enough. The Allies were not winning the Battle of the Atlantic. They were surviving it. The strategic imperative was absolute. Find a miracle weapon. A game changer. The first and most rational path was radar invisibility. Scientists in Germany, Britain, and the US were all racing to create stealth technology craft that could absorb or deflect radar signals. The second path was magnetic invisibility. This is the first provable fact in our story. The biggest threat, after torpedoes, was the magnetic mine. These mines would detonate when they sensed the massive metal hull of a ship passing over them. The Allied solution was brilliant. It was called degaussing. By running a powerful electric current through cables wrapped around the ship, they could neutralize its magnetic signature, making it invisible to the mines. This process was highly classified. It involved strange equipment, electrical generators, and would have been completely baffling to any civilian who saw it. It is the seed from which the legend of the Philadelphia experiment would grow. But the legend required something more than just degaussing. It required a name: Albert Einstein. In the 1940s, Einstein was, in fact, working as a consultant for the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ordnance. This is documented. He was also, famously, consumed by the holy grail of physics, the unified field theory. A single, elegant set of equations that would unite the forces of electromagnetism and gravity. If such a theory could be mastered, what could it do? Could it bend light around an object, making it invisible? Could it, as the most extreme theorists proposed, even bend space and time itself? The Navy had a desperate need. Einstein had a revolutionary theory. The degaussing experiments provided the cover. The stage was set for a myth. All it needed was a storyteller. The story of the Philadelphia experiment does not begin in 1943. It begins 12 years later, with this man, Morris K. Jessup. Jessup was not a crank. He was an astronomer, an archaeologist, and a respected author. His 1955 book, The Case for the UFO, was a serious, data-driven attempt to argue that unidentified flying objects were real and worthy of scientific study. He believed they were not from other planets, but perhaps from an advanced, ancient Earth civilization. In 1956, Jessup received a letter from a man calling himself Carlos Miguel Allende. It was the first of many. The letters were bizarre. They were written in a rambling, almost schizophrenic style, with notes in the margins, capitalized words, and passages in red, blue, and green ink. Allende claimed Jessup's theories about UFOs were wrong. He claimed to know the truth about levitation and propulsion, because he had seen it. In Philadelphia, 1943, in these letters, the entire legend is born. Allende claimed he was a sailor on the merchant ship SS Andrew Furuseth, and from its deck, he witnessed the experiment on the USS Eldridge. He described the sickly green fog that was not a fog, but a field. He described the ship vanishing from sight in a blinding flash. He described the horrific aftermath. He claimed he later spoke to sailors who survived. He wrote of men who would go blank or get stuck, becoming frozen in space and time, immobile, while the world moved around them. He told the story of one survivor who, in a bar fight, simply dematerialized, vanished, never to be seen again. He described, in chilling detail, the men fused to the ship. He called it the result of the test. Morris Jessup was intrigued, but disturbed. He wrote back, asking for proof. Allende replied, but offered no hard evidence, only more cryptic warnings. Jessup, frustrated, eventually dismissed Allende as a disturbed individual. The correspondence went cold, and here, the story should have ended, but it didn't. Because in 1957, 2 years later, Jessup received a shocking letter, not from Allende, but from the United States Navy. The Office of Naval Research, ONR, had received a package. It was a copy of Jessup's own book, The Case for the UFO, mailed to them anonymously, and it was filled with the exact same multicolored annotations from Carlos Allende. The Navy was deeply interested. They summoned Jessup to Washington, D.C. They asked him to analyze the annotations. Then, they did the single most inexplicable thing in this entire story. The ONR, through a military contractor named Varro Manufacturing, paid to have the book privately printed, with all of Allende's bizarre annotations included. This became known as the Varro edition. Only a handful of copies were made. Narrator: this is the central zero point of the entire mystery. Why would the Office of Naval Research, at the height of the Cold War, dedicate government time and resources to printing and studying a crackpot's annotations? Why legitimize a story of teleporting ships and men fused in steel? Unless, buried in the madness, was a kernel of truth they recognized. A truth they were desperate to understand, or to silence. For Morris Jessup, this event was a validation, and it would also be his death sentence. The Varro edition changed Morris Jessup. The mystery of the experiment, and the Navy's bizarre interest in it, consumed him. He was an astronomer, but he stopped looking at the stars. He became a full-time investigator, trying to find Carlos Allende and the other sailors. He believed he was on the verge of the greatest discovery in human history, but the world thought he was losing his mind. His career collapsed. His publisher dropped him. His wife left him. He was plagued by a series of strange, unlucky events. He spoke to friends of being watched and feeling followed. On April 20th, 1959, Morris K. Jessup was found dead in his car in a park in Dade County, Florida. A hose was piped from the exhaust into the cab. The official ruling: suicide. But to those who knew him, it was unbelievable. He had told friends he was on the verge of a breakthrough in the Philadelphia case. He had been in good spirits. Was he silenced? Did he get too close to the truth of the Varro edition? Was he the first casualty of the cover-up? Or was he, more tragically, a brilliant man broken by an obsession, a story so powerful it could claim a human life? The file remained closed for decades. But to find the truth, investigators had to find the source. Who was Carlos Miguel Allende? In the 1980s, researchers finally found him. His name was not Carlos Allende. It was Carl Meredith Allen. He was not a mysterious sailor. He was a drifter, a merchant marine with a known history of mental instability and a fantastical imagination. He was a prolific letter writer. He wrote to physicists, philosophers, and magazines, claiming to have solved Einstein's unified field theory, to understand the nature of gravity, to have spoken with aliens. In a moment of shocking clarity, Carl Allende confessed. He admitted it was all a hoax, a tall tale he had invented, based on his misunderstandings of physics and things he'd overheard. He said he annotated Jessup's book as a prank. Case closed, right? The experiment is a hoax. The witness is a fraud. No, because almost immediately, Carl Allende recanted his confession. He claimed he had been forced to sign the retraction. He went back to his original story, insisting every word he wrote was true. He maintained this until his death in 1994. This leaves us in an impossible position. Our only primary witness is a confirmed fabulist, who was also, perhaps, a traumatized witness. Or was he something else? A tool, a pawn, in a disinformation campaign? Jessup's death seemed to close the file. The original witness was unstable. The investigator was dead. The story should have died, but it didn't. Because in the 1980s, a new witness appeared. A man who claimed he wasn't just a witness, he was a survivor. This is Al Bielek, and in 1988, he hijacked the Philadelphia experiment legend and catapulted it into a new dimension. Bielek claimed that he had been on the USS Eldridge, that his real name was Edward Cameron. He claimed that when the experiment went wrong, he and his brother, Duncan, didn't just teleport to Norfolk. He claimed they were thrown forward in time. Bielek claimed they landed in the year 1983 at a secret military base, Camp Hero, at Montauk, Long Island. He claimed the Philadelphia experiment was not the end. It was the beginning. This is the birth of the Montauk Project conspiracy. Bielek and others wove a saga claiming that the technology from the Eldridge was perfected at Montauk, leading to decades of secret experiments in psychic warfare, mind control, creating matter from thought, and opening interdimensional portals. Bielek's story was a sensation. It explained everything. The sailors who vanished, they weren't dead. They were lost in time. The men driven mad, their minds were shattered by the psychic technology. This new narrative explained why the government was so desperate to cover up the original 1943 experiment, because the results were still being used 40 years later. This narrative of time loops and psychic warfare is a universe away from a 1943 invisibility test. It's easy to dismiss Al Bielek as a fantasy-prone individual, building on Carl Allende's original fantasy. But it forces us back to the original question. We have the wild stories of Allen. We have the tragic obsession of Jessup. We have the bizarre time travel claims of Bielek. But what about the ship itself? What does history say? When we separate the myth from the steel, what do we find? The answer is devastatingly simple. This is the official war diary of the USS Eldridge. It is not a secret document. You can view it today at the National Archives. The entries are meticulous. They are also boring. On the alleged date of the experiment, October 28th, 1943, the Eldridge was not in Philadelphia. The logbook states, unequivocally, that the USS Eldridge was on its shakedown cruise. On that date, it was in the waters of the Bahamas. It didn't even arrive in Philadelphia for the first time until 1944. Fact number 1. The Eldridge was not there. What about the witness? Carlos Allende claimed he watched from his ship, the SS Andrew Furuseth. The logs for that ship show it was in the Mediterranean. It, too, was nowhere near Philadelphia. Fact number 2. The witness was not there. In 1999, the surviving veterans of the USS Eldridge held a reunion in Atlantic City. For the first time, they spoke to the press, as a group, about the legend that had followed their ship for 50 years. They were not secretive. They were not scared. They were annoyed. They laughed at the story. One veteran, Ed Tempany, said, quote, "I don't know who started the story, but I think he had too much to drink." Another, Bill Van Allen, said, It's the most ridiculous, fantastic story I've ever heard. They confirmed what we suspected. They were involved in classified experiments. Degaussing, making the ship invisible to magnetic torpedoes. They said the green glow Allende described was likely Street Elmo's fire, a common electrical weather phenomenon at sea. This gives us the most plausible origin story of all. The barroom story theory. Imagine. Sailors from the Eldridge, on shore leave, are in a bar. They are proud of their secret invisibility work, degaussing. They spin a wild, tall tale to impress the other sailors, and in the corner of that bar, a young, imaginative, and unstable Carl Meredith Allen is listening. He hears classified. He hears invisibility. He hears electrical generators. And in the furnace of his mind, he forges a legend. This explains everything. The letters, the hoax, the veteran's testimony. It explains it all. Except one thing. The entire case falls apart under scrutiny. But this book remains. The Varro edition. If the story was a known hoax, why did the Office of Naval Research print it? This is the real mystery. And there are two terrifying possibilities. Theory 1. The UFO connection. The Navy wasn't interested in the Philadelphia experiment. They were interested in Jessup. In 1957, the Cold War was raging. UFOs were being seen everywhere, especially over military bases. The ONR was genuinely investigating unconventional propulsion, exactly what Jessup's book was about. Perhaps they saw Allende's notes, not as a report on a past experiment, but as a bizarre, new theory on propulsion, mailed to them by a thinker who just happened to be eccentric. They studied it, found it useless, and dropped it. Theory 2. The PSYOP. This theory is darker. The Navy knew the story was a hoax. The printing of the book, that was the real experiment. Think. It's the 1950s. The military is fascinated by psychological warfare. What if they saw Allende's letters as a perfect test case? A disinformation seed. They print the book, accidentally leak it to the conspiracy world, and then sit back and watch. How far does the story spread? How does it mutate? Can they use this technique against the Soviets? In this scenario, Morris Jessup was not a truth seeker. He was a lab rat. He wasn't killed by a Men in Black agent. He was driven to suicide by the story itself, a story actively encouraged by his own government. This makes the Philadelphia experiment a different kind of horror. Not a story of physics gone wrong, but of psychology weaponized. So, what was the Philadelphia experiment? The evidence is overwhelming that the USS Eldridge did not teleport. The laws of physics, as we know them, remained unbroken, but the event did happen. Not in the world of steel and water, but in the world of memory, myth, and information. It was a perfect storm, a real, classified technology, degaussing, a desperate wartime need, the U-boat menace, a brilliant, unstable storyteller, Carl Allende, and a tragic, obsessive investigator, Morris Jessup. These elements collided, and the resulting explosion was not one of physics, but one of narrative. A story so powerful, it rewrote history. These lingering questions, these 0 points, where the official record and the human testimony refuse to align, are the exact mysteries we are dedicated to exploring. If you believe that our history is filled with shadows, whispers, and secrets that are still hiding in plain sight, subscribe to 0 Point Lore. We are building a community to investigate the moments where our reality seems to thin. What is the real secret of the Philadelphia experiment? Was it a sailor's tall tale that got out of hand? Was it the tragic obsession of two broken men? Or was it a successful psychological operation? A shadow war that claimed Morris Jessup as its first victim? Let us know your theory in the comments below. The true legacy of the Philadelphia experiment is not a warning about technology. It's a warning about stories. It proves that a story, if told at the right time, to the right people, can become more real than the truth. It reminds us that our fear of secret military power, our fascination with the unknown, and our desperate hope that the boundaries of our world are breakable is the most powerful force of all. the ship never vanished. But the truth did.